Okay, good day, Dad. Today is April 29th, a Monday, and there's a lot going on in the world right now. I don't even know where to start. I feel like we have three big theaters to cover. There's what's been happening in China, there's the Ukraine Russian theater, and there is the Middle East theater. Where do we want to start today? Where do you want to start today?
Well, for no particular reason, let's just start with Palestine and Israel.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I mean, we'll talk about what's going on right now, but before we do, I think maybe we want to just go back to that retaliatory attack by Iran because more information's come out about that, and I think some of it's really very interesting, and actually. Yeah,
Interesting.
more than interesting. Let's say illuminating. It's
Oh,
yeah, helps us to understand. I think um, maybe U.S. policy, not just in the Middle East but also in Ukraine. Anyway, first of all, there was a report from a retired Israeli general that Israel spent $1.3 billion worth of missiles, in defending Israel against the attack by Iran.
hmm.
Now, more recently, there's come out reports also in the Israeli media that the total cost, because remember that Israel was only part of this, part of a defensive coalition. The U.S., France, and the UK were also involved in very, very much involved, actively involved in defending Israel against the attack. And if you look at the total, for the combined effort, it ends up being 2 to 3 billion for that one night.
Wow.
I mean, the so the U.S. Well, I don't know if I don't think it was just the U.S. The U.S. And the coalition had 154 fighter aircraft in the air, firing Sidewinder missiles, each of which cost $500,000. And just these are very expensive aircraft. Just they burn up fuel at an astonishing rate, and just to operate them for a couple of hours is very expensive. So they had 154 of them firing these missiles, and when all was said and done, at the end of the night, from $2 to $3 billion was spent. And again, that clearly there's a point we made earlier, but this has been further emphasized by this
Do
information.
you,
That's not sustainable in any kind of long
yeah, I mean,
war.
it's 2 or 3 billion for what was supposed to be kind of a warning shot from Iran. That's an absurd number. But do we know how much Iran spent on their offense?
Well, I think they came out with a figure of, I can't remember what it was, but it was a tiny fraction. It was like in the tens of millions. Is what it what it was. Of course, Iran has a much smaller economy, but still that the proportion is enormous. I mean, the ratio
Right.
is enormous, and so
Right. So what's becoming clear is just that countries can bleed the Western air defense systems dry very quickly. Even the Houthis, who have a GDP per capita of, I don't know, less than $1,000 or something like this,
right,
can really cripple the U.S. military just because they can send over these $10,000 drones and cause the U.S. to burn up $1 million to shoot down that one $10,000 drone.
right.
So yeah, it seems like the people in the Pentagon have to be panicking, right? They have to realize that this is a
Yeah,
problem here, right?
right. Well, and again, it was penetrated. Again, this was there were Patriot systems involved, but there's an Iron Dome, which I think is really the Iron Dome is a joint U.S.-Israeli project. And again, this is something that was built up over decades. Many tens of billions of dollars were put into this system.
Mm.
And I think, as I mentioned earlier, according to the MIT professor Theodore Postel, according to his analysis of videos, he could not find any evidence of anything being shot down by an Iron Dome interceptor.
So that means that our air defense mostly relies on fighter jets in the air shooting Sidewinder missiles.
Well, that seems to be in the case of this attack. I think that they largely took out the drones. Now, some of the ballistic missiles, we don't really know how many. I don't know how many ballistic missiles Iran fired or launched, but some of those may have been taken out by the the Arrow and the David Slings missiles, which are are separate from the Iron Dome.
Those are
One thing
much
is,
more expensive,
yeah,
though,
they're
right?
much more expensive. That's right, and I'm sure quantities are much smaller than. Yeah, those impacts would not have shown up in the videos because they would have probably been high in the atmosphere. But even so, it was confirmed that at least nine of these missiles did land, and and they hit their targets.
So when you say it's been confirmed, are you able to say who confirmed it? Because Israel doesn't want to confirm it, right? The United
Right.
States won't confirm it.
Right. Well, I think
So,
again, it was an Israeli source. It's not something that the Iranians did.
okay. So
So,
people
so
in Israel know
right.
that nine.
So I think we can say well, it was clear actually just from these videos that there were at least 9 impacts, and that was admitted to, by I don't know exactly,
Right.
but from an Israeli source.
So
Israeli,
here in the United States, they're trying to hide that fact. Most
yeah,
people in the United States don't realize that Iran really kind of dominated in
right.
in this
And
attack.
this is something I was just thinking about, and obviously okay. There's one motivation that we've discussed before. It's just mainly, they want to sing the praises of the Israeli defense system, so that Israel would not be under pressure to respond, to escalate,
Mm,
because it was clear that the U.S. did not want an escalation. They did not want war with Iran. So so they had an obvious motivation here obvious motive to paint this picture of of Israeli invulnerability or of invincibility, of Israeli
mm,
success against the attack, to take off the pressure for some significant retaliation. And then, but I realized that there really is another motive which may be equally powerful. Maybe it's more powerful. It's just that again, these air defense systems are very expensive. I mentioned that a single Patriot battery, that's the system plus the full complement of missiles, the interceptors, is $1.1 billion. But
mm.
these are high price items in there. And, first of all, we're talking about business. There's obviously a lot of money, involved in the reputation of the Patriot system and similar systems like the Iron Dome. But it's more than that. This is something that Alistair Crook pointed out. Like when the U.S. signs a defense treaty with a country like Saudi Arabia,
Mm.
they say one of the main things that they're offering them is, okay, we're offering you protection, and we can do it with our advanced
Right.
technology. We can do it with the Patriot system. Now, there was first, let's say, questions were raised in the mind of the Saudi Arabians after that Aramco oil facility attack in 2019 that I mentioned. That
Right.
was, the Iranians were either directly behind it, or they provided the missiles that maybe were fired by the Houthis. One way or the other, these were Iranian missiles, and they made direct hits, and they penetrated the Patriot missile system. And this was something the Saudi Arabians were upset about. Now, notice that actually in Ukraine, a number of like say launchers and entire batteries of the Patriot batteries have been pretty much wiped out, and that clearly, again, was was bad news for Ukraine, but it's also bad news for the U.S. MIC.
Right. Who wants to
Right.
sign these defense contracts if they just see like, well, you give us $20 billion worth of air defense and it just gets blown up and it doesn't
Right.
even stop anything anyways.
Right.
Yeah. Or
occasionally,
it can
it's
stop
good.
some
Right.
drones.
Some
Maybe.
ballistic missiles, it's actually pretty good on the whole against ballistic missiles.
Right.
But it can't handle the hypersonic, and it's actually not very good against drones and subsonic cruise missiles that stay close to the ground.
Right. It can be overwhelmed by cheap drones,
Mhm.
hypersonic missiles it can't intercept. So it has sort of a very narrow window.
Right.
And then also the reality is that countries are adapting their offensive drone and missile capabilities to circumvent, go around any defense capabilities that the U.S. provides.
Right.
What do we have to offer them anymore?
Yeah. Right. So anyway, this is a major blow, and you can understand the incentive that they have to deny, and and exaggerate its abilities. There's a lot of money at stake, but there's this prestige of the United States at stake. There are alliances at stake because, again, this was part of the deal that we've had, for example, with Saudi Arabia. Okay, yeah, we're partners and we'll just make sure you're protected. We'll give you the state of the art equipment, the Patriot systems, and you'll be safe. And then you find out, well, wait a second, I just spent how many billions of dollars and I'm not safe. And I've just seen that, the Iranians can penetrate it. The Russians are just wiping them out in Ukraine. So this has got to have a lot of people in the Pentagon and in, all and among these defense contractors panicking. Say this is, I'm sure a lot of people probably care more about this, than actually like winning in Ukraine. They could say, hey, we could lose in Ukraine, but we can't have the reputation of the Patriot destroyed. We can't have the reputation of the Abrams destroyed. There's billions and billions of dollars and all kinds of treaties and everything that are kind of dependent on these prestige systems.
Right. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit before, how the military-industrial complex is in trouble because of really this is their sales are going to be hurt. This is a huge blow to their ability to sell these weapon systems. And now you mentioned these defense contracts that form these alliances with different countries. So how do you see this playing out for the military-industrial complex? Does this cause the military-industrial complex? Well, what does it do when it no longer is able to sell its goods?
Well,
does it just sell them to the government? Our own government
it can always do that, right? You can always do that, but obviously, those exports are a big part of the business, and it would really hurt them where it matters, maybe the most in the pocketbook. And again, it's just damage to the U.S. prestige, which is, that's. It's just the general, it's just like a brand name, you associate, okay, it's a Toyota. I know this is a car that's going to last. I'm not even going to spend a whole lot of time researching. It's just a Toyota. And I think that's the way people had an impression of a lot of American military hardware. Right. I think we're probably people were very impressed by what happened in the first Gulf War and whatever. There was a dazzling display of, that these were the first smart bombs that were used and so on and so forth.
Do you think part of the reason we got into some of these conflicts was almost as kind of a sales display? To be like, show off some of our weapons and people are like, whoa, that looks pretty cool. Maybe we, is that
goodness, I never thought about that. That's very cynical, but that doesn't mean it's not true. It's actually probably
seems
in this
right
case.
In line. I mean, there's probably some people that feel
yeah,
that
yeah, right. I wouldn't say that that's all what it's about. But
just another variable.
Right. I think that there are certainly going to be influential people that, they're in this as for the business and for the profit. And when we say the military-industrial complex, we're saying just that. That it's not just the U.S. government and its armed forces, who are serving U.S. interests. When we say there's a military-industrial complex, they say there's a lot of money flowing through this, and so people are a lot of them become focused on the money above all.
Right. I mean, if you think about it, kind of a war or conflict is like a huge public expo for the United States,
right?
And that might be kind of the way they look at these wars, these foreign conflicts, and they might have just thought like, okay, well, we did great at this last expo in Afghanistan or whatever. Right. Now let's do it. We'll do another one, and we'll show in Europe. But all of a sudden, it's almost like Tesla rolling out its Cybertruck,
and a wheel falls off,
and the wheels fall. Or you saw what happened. The actual Cybertruck, they all got recalled,
right? And
then they try to show the bulletproof glass, and it just broke, and so like, whoops, this one didn't work out. Yeah. But of course, the stakes are so much higher here. So I don't know if you fully answered the question, though. Like, what does this mean for the military-industrial complex in the short term and the long run? Does this mean that it will start to collapse on itself, or how does this beast?
Well, it should be a wake-up call, right? And say, okay, wait a second.
They're not going to wake up.
Yeah, actually, I know. Yeah, it should be a wake-up call and say, okay, we've gone down the wrong road. There's some serious corruption. There's some A lot of money is being spent, and we're not getting a lot for it. And we're actually falling behind. Or we have systems that are not, um, not really geared to present day realities, to the new form of war. And I know that we went over this briefly before. So that you would think, again, a rational government would say this is the time to initiate reforms and and restructure the entire.
Mhm.
It would be a big, huge house cleaning of the military-industrial complex, but I just don't see any signs of that
Right.
happening
There's
yet.
too many cogs in the system. Too many
Right,
people getting their pockets lined.
right, yeah. I mean, too
Uh,
many people. So in the end, I don't think we still have. We're still comforted by this belief in our own superiority. The exceptional nation, and it's just too many people are very comfortable with the way things are. I mean, these wars still, they, they're not going the way that we'd like them to, and they're certainly causing a great deal of discomfort and alarm. I imagine in certain quarters of the State Department and the Pentagon, but a lot of people at home, they don't really understand what's going on. These are, you know, taking place 1,000 miles away, and you can always have a media just kind of spin it. And I think that's what happened clearly, in this like this Iranian attack. It was, it, again, certain analysts probably said "oops" and are ringing the alarm bells in either the CIA or the Pentagon or wherever. But the media just went and pulled out all stops in trying to present it as a wonderful victory, and probably most Americans believe it, and they don't understand the vulnerabilities of the system. But
the rest of the world, though,
yeah, well, I mean,
how does the rest of the world believe it? I mean, what do Western European countries, do all governments in the world kind of understand what's happened?
I don't know how much these people understand. I mean, I just have a very low opinion of Western leaders. We just have these are not our best and brightest.
So, but the global majority, they got to all understand, right? Now, the global,
I think
most of
certainly,
them.
yeah. They're getting very different kinds of reports there. So yeah,
So this just means further isolation for the United States, right? That all of a
right,
sudden the U.S. doesn't have anything, doesn't have much to offer countries anymore.
right,
It used to be that, okay, we can offer you our protection. You enter in these alliances, and also we'll give you tons of money because we own the printing press. But now both of those are kind of being undermined. The countries are de-dollarizing, and then just like you said, people are realizing that the U.S. can't defend. That it's not that impressive militarily. That it's selling a bunch of overpriced goods that don't actually do a whole lot.
right.
So
Yeah. Well, I can just to jump over to Ukraine very quickly. It was just the other day a report came out that the the U.S. had actually instructed the Ukrainians not to use the Abrams tanks on the front anymore.
it's too embarrassing.
They lost 5 of them, and then there was a 6th, an engineering vehicle that's based on the Abrams tank that was also destroyed.
And
And then others were damaged, and they just told them, don't use them, but they assured them they would figure something out. But I imagine, again, like you're saying, it was just an expo that went wrong, and you got to think that's that they must be quite worried about what will happen to the F-16s.
right.
I mean, again, I don't think the Pentagon ever wanted to supply those, but the politicians who don't understand anything, and they maybe they recently saw Top Gun or whatever, and that's the extent of their knowledge. They say just send those F-16s out there, but again, those people, those military contractors and lobbyists and so forth, they're all part of the MIC. They're probably very worried about what's going to happen to those F-16s, because just one video of an F-16 being shot out of the sky is going to be just really bad for business. I mean, that's because we've been using them against countries that could not defend themselves against.
Right, but why isn't there more calls to pull the plug on things like the Ukraine war? I mean, because we said, like, if we use this in this analogy of the Ukraine war being a military arms expo for the United States. It's a dumpster fire for the United States.
Right.
If there's anything that we could send to the Ukrainians to help them win the war, we would have done it. But the reality is everything we sent has been neutralized. We sent these ATACMS. Now we keep on crossing our own red line saying that we're not going to send long range capabilities. Now we send long range ATACMS.
Yeah.
I just heard they launched like 5 at the Kerch Bridge. Russia shot them all down.
Right.
So it's just showing again that even our offensive capabilities aren't that great. We don't have hypersonic missiles, which we covered before.
We still don't.
We so our offensive missiles are not even that effective. They're not fast enough to get by Russian air defense systems. So our defensive military capabilities and our offensive military capabilities are both being on display as essentially defunct and sort of archaic almost now. These things belong in the museum. They might have been cool in the 90s, but right now they don't seem to have a place on the modern military field. I mean, is that do you think that's fair, or is that too harsh?
Maybe that's a little bit too harsh, but it's but there's a lot of truth to it. Anyway, again, they've just shown not to be. This aura of invincibility and of superiority, of Western superiority, certainly has been punctured. Again, I think we have a media that, all in all, is working pretty hard to hide that from our citizens. But
it doesn't matter.
But that's right. I mean, it's sort of maybe we can always lie to ourselves, but in the end, you're not changing the reality. I think that, really the problem, the only way to explain this really self-destructive behavior, this kind of ostrich head in the sand kind of behavior that we're displaying here, is that we really believe, that we are the exceptional nation, the indispensable nation. It's something that, and it just blinds us to realities. It prevents us from actually carrying out the reforms and the self-assessments that we need to conduct. I think there's just, to do an honest self-assessment, you have to have a degree of humility, and actually to carry out a reform, if somebody who's going to change his habits or whatever, you have to have a degree of humility. Okay, yeah, I went down the wrong path, whatever. And we just don't have that. I'm just thinking,
do you know what?
Just very quickly, just thinking today, it's maybe a little bit hard for us to understand, but people who go into politics are generally people that are attracted by power and the idea of wielding power. And there was a time when you're saying we were the exceptional nation or whatever, it wasn't so ridiculous, especially in the 90s, early 2000s. We were the hyperpower, and we didn't have any serious rivals. And I think that that's just intoxicating to people who love power. Mm-hmm. And it's just something that it's very hard, or maybe they're just completely incapable of letting go of that. It's just something that, to be the one in the room and say, okay, guys, we're not number one anymore. You're the naysayer, the doomsayer, and the rest of us know that we're just like Biden himself said, we're the United States of America. In other words, we can conduct 3 wars at once.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think the root of all that problem, the hubris and the lack of humility and the idea that we're an exceptional nation, a lot of it can, I think, be boiled down to just the money. This is allowed because we are the world reserve currency and we control the printing press. We're not backed by any type of currency. If we actually politicians had to actually extract the money from the populace, from its constituents, in order to fund these things, it wouldn't happen. The reason all this is allowed is because we can just let our senators pass a $95 billion foreign aid bill that none of the citizens really want.
Right.
But they can do it because they don't need to tax us. They can inflate it away. Right. They print the money. I mean, think about what happened in World War II. People had to went out and bought war bonds. Right. You finance the war effort. That doesn't happen here anymore. So the root of all of the problem, I think you have to fix the money. Yeah. If we don't fix the money, the system is going to just continue the way it's going. And unfortunately, it's going to end up with the destruction of our money, because they will continue to debase
Uh-huh.
our currency, and the rest of the world will begin to drop the dollar, and then we will have no choice, and we'll be sitting
Right.
there, amongst the ruins with our worthless dollars, and the system is broken. And I hope it doesn't have to go that far, but
Uh-huh.
I feel like if we can't fix the money, if we can't get to hard money and sound money, then the system it's already on that path. It can't be
Right.
turned around. We talked about this before
Right.
with $35 trillion in debt, and getting $1 trillion every 100 days.
Right.
Our debt's increasing by $1 trillion every 100 days. Our
Right.
interest payments are supposed to hit $1 trillion a year starting next
Yeah.
year.
Right.
Um,
Or yeah, even surpassing that.
yeah, or even surpassing. Again, that's just the start. So
Right.
it's clear that it's a runaway train and it can't be fixed. The lesson here, I think, for a new government is that you have to fix the money. Because if you don't fix the money, then all these politicians will find a way to promise more,
Right.
and then corrupt lobbyists or the military industrial complex can bill the United States government whatever amount of money they
Yeah.
want. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's the root of it, in my
Right.
opinion.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right. Yeah. Well, I think there's no question about it. It's a big part of it. The free money is a big part of the problem. And if we had to pay as we went, a lot of these things wouldn't happen. Just to give one example, in the Iraq War, which ended up costing trillions of dollars, I think if you actually had to send a bill to each family for how much the Iraq War cost, which achieved absolutely nothing, only we don't even need to talk about it
yeah,
right now. But it would have been like a $50,000 bill to each family. Now, if people receive that bill, or if they were told ahead of time, well, we're going to do this, it's really important, but you're going to probably have to pay $50,000. Each of you families. How many people would support it? I would say nobody would, right?
yeah. And the ones
But
that do, like, I got some magic beans to sell you. We
yeah,
gotta find
yeah,
those suckers.
right. And so yeah, just this free money has been very corrupting. So that it all takes on an aura of unreality. I mean, so yeah, just this is all make believe money, and so we can do anything. And whenever we pass this bill, and we're Winston Churchill, right? And nobody pays for it. It does, and in the end, you do pay for it, of course, but it's invisible. Nobody gets the bill.
Comes through in inflation.
Yeah, but I think another part of it is the media. Our media power is the U.S. media has tremendous power around the globe among now its allies. Within Europe, and what I think more than and even places like Taiwan, a lot of the reports that come out in all the establishment papers are basically translations or interpretations, of they take as their starting point, what the U.S. media is doing. It happens in Europe, and it happens, even among our Asian allies. And so we can do something. Go back to again, take the Iraq War as an example. Okay, we spent a couple $1 trillion on that. It was a total disaster, but nobody got the bill for it. Okay, it was a total disaster. There was, maybe a million people died directly and indirectly from it. There were millions of refugees, so on and so forth, which should be understood to have been the disaster that it was. But we have a media that is good at spinning things and then shifting focus and whatever. So it's just like kind of going around, always cleaning up the mess and prettying the pictures, or, when it can't be prettied up, just hiding it and suppressing things. So it's just, so again, nobody is ever accountable, either in a monetary sense or morally, or that's something that's. But in the end, too, though, it can't change the reality, and it's leading to just one bad decision after another, and a failure to carry out reforms. So it's just going to, at some point, the reality, is going to become apparent for anybody to see. I mean, anybody's going to spend this time can figure out what's going on, but most people don't do that. But at some point, the consequences of all these back decisions are just going to be there, are going to have a direct impact on people's daily lives. And at that point, the game's over. But
Right. Well, do you feel like it's starting to already have a direct impact? I mean, when you talk about
well,
direct impact, we're talking about what inflation
mhm.
is. Is it mainly
Yeah. Well, I think that's
economic
what.
for citizens
Right.
in the U.S.? Is that
Right.
all that will really get people out of their seats? Is once they see the price of gas hit $10, or
Yeah,
their
well,
eggs hit
that's
$5?
something that'll wake people up and make them angry, and is already. I mean, the inflation is something that we've seen. Despite all the efforts to deny it, I see it every time I go to the grocery store. People
Mm,
again say, well, maybe like the last few months or whatever, inflation's hardly grown at all. But the thing is, it's just, it's a lot of things are 40%, 50% more than they were just 3 or 4 years ago.
mm,
And, and my income hasn't gone up, by the same amount. A lot of us are in that fix. We're looking at that and saying, well, geez, what happened? Um, the I guess the danger is I'm saying that people might wake up. Maybe that's not necessarily true. That people just might become angry, but they don't because they're not being told what the truth is.
mm.
They'll they'll find a scapegoat or they'll seize on this or that ridiculous explanation. Um,
Right. And then, the sad thing is as people become angry in the West, in the United States, and the answer that politicians will provide will we just got to spend more money. It's like,
yeah,
oh, these wars aren't going well. It's like, we just got to give a larger military defense budget. That'll fix the problem.
right.
It's kind of
Yeah, well,
this.
that's what they're saying now. Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Always doubling down.
It's just going to expedite the decline though, just because we're not fixing the root of the problem,
Right.
and in my opinion, I mean there's a lot of things in this, but the root of it I feel like is the fact that the money's broken, and that allows them to keep on passing these large bills and keep on increasing defense budgets and keep
Right.
on raising the debt
Right.
ceiling until it eventually breaks.
Right. Yeah.
And do you think other countries like Iran and Russia and China are aware of this, and they kind of understand like, well, just the United States is just going to bleed itself dry, through its government getting too large and out of control. You know, I'm kind of thinking of, correct me if I'm wrong. I remember something about Osama bin Laden saying that they'd be like an annoying fly or a bee, and the United States is this giant, but it'll try to swat us and go crazy, end up tripping over itself. That's kind of what I'm
Hmm.
envisioning. Maybe other countries are thinking about the United States. It's like, wow, look how much their money is just out of control. They're spending millions of dollars per missile, air defense missile. We can just
Yeah.
bleed them dry,
Yeah.
and then is that a strategy that you think that they're actually actively other countries actively think about and employ with the United States?
Well, yeah, I don't know if they. Well, in the case of the war in Ukraine,
Just a
yeah,
byproduct
but
of the strategy, though, right?
right,
They're
yeah,
in a war of attrition, and
yeah. Well, I think at a military level, certainly, I think this is something. Again, I think it probably even came as a surprise to the Russians. I don't know how much they understood before the war. Again, I was thinking, well, the Russians are you really screwed this up. I was thinking in the first few months because they went in with such a small force, and you say now, certainly the mighty um, uh, U.S. military machine and all of NATO will just start cranking out, all their just an endless stream of weapons, and it's going to now that they now that the Russians are in Ukraine, they should have done it quickly. Now it's
Mhm.
going to be because you give them a few months or give them a year, and then
Spin
it's
off
going to
their
be
war
because, yeah,
machine.
again, like they're supposed to have 20 times the size of the Russian economy. It turned out to be all meaningless. We don't have it, but we've talked about that quite a bit. But um, yeah, but I don't know if the Russians understood that ahead of time. Maybe they did. Maybe that's why they're doing so well.
Well,
But I don't. But to be truth be told, they didn't really seem to. They weren't really planning for this war. That became clear. Putin had this limited plan. It was a way to actually. He was hoping for negotiations, and we've talked about that before. But um, so it was only like after 6 months or so that he really committed to a war and started cranking things up and mobilizing people and. Um,
I'm trying to wrap my head around why. we are always throwing good money after bad, in these situations. Like with the Ukraine conflict, it's, we just signed this, gave them $61 billion, and right now the front line is collapsing. Nothing's happening. And I'm hearing that we're trying to reach some agreement for a 10-year security guarantee for Ukraine to keep financing them. And we just said how these conflicts are kind of a arms expo for the United States, and this expo is a dumpster fire for the United States. Nothing about this is good for America, for the US. So I just don't understand, what is the strategy?
Yeah.
What are these people thinking?
I just don't think there really is a
But
strategy,
surely the
right?
people in the Pentagon, the military industrial complex, they probably don't want this, right? I mean, maybe in the short term they can secure large contracts. Is that all they care about? It's like, well, we'll just keep
Well,
on building
I'm
the United States for more
sure.
money,
Well,
and
I think
these
so,
weapons
that
don't do
right.
anything.
I'm sure
And
some of them, yeah, for that, it's a way. Um, right. I think a lot of them are just career oriented, and they say, this is great. It's just any kind of war, and but then the ones at the top are very, political animals, and they know what the administration wants and what the administration wants to hear, and they just repeat it, and they don't. I don't think they really have a
it
strategy.
just, I feel like there's got to be, it's just so insane. And then when you combine it with what's happening in the Middle East, and then Blinken going over and wanting to start an economic war with China and maybe a physical war, it's just so crazy to
Right.
think that we're doing all this
Right.
stuff that just, to a fifth grader could say like, wait, this
Right.
doesn't make sense.
Right.
So
Yeah. Again, the only way that I can explain it is just that, again, we're sort of, these people just cannot let go of the exceptional nation idea. I mean, if you are the exceptional nation, if you are the hyperpower, you can go and the normal rules don't apply to you. You can go and go to China and insult them, and
yeah,
threaten
okay,
them. But yeah,
sure.
otherwise, how can I can't explain it otherwise,
I
because it
think
just, it
there's
is very self-destructive.
I feel like there's some kind of evil source pull with the puppet strings pulling things. It just doesn't make sense to me. And
Yeah.
another thing that I think we just kind of glanced over last week, that I want to explore a bit more, is when we said that, Donald Trump was someone that was firmly against the Ukraine war. He was always saying, "I will end it in 24 hours. This is a waste of money.
Yeah.
It's bad." And then he flipped
Right.
and then gave the blessing, and that's largely why this $95 billion
Right.
aid bill got passed. What made him change his mind? What happens to people when they become politicians? Do they get
Yeah.
in? Do the Israelis? Do the Jews put a mind virus in them? And they're like, no, I have one.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
an anti-Semite. No. But I mean, but sometimes I do wonder if the Israelis and the Zionist, lobby is so
Right.
powerful.
But of course, the main thing
that-
here, there was never an issue when it came to the funding for Israel. So there's no flip flop there. He was
Right.
always 100% on board with that. The flip flop came.
I guess we
when
should
it
say
came to-
flip. Because flip, then you flop back.
Okay.
So they flipped.
Right. Was
So yeah,
Ukraine.
he flipped on you.
Yeah. I wasn't surprised by it. I'll be honest. It's just, I think a lot of people um, take certain statements that he makes, just too seriously. And part of the reason I think that they do that, I mean, very smart people like John Mearsheimer or whatever, the reason they do that is that there are so many people, so many of his opponents, so many people in the media and in the Democratic Party that are just completely unhinged in their hatred to Donald Trump. They said they were going on and on about how he's a Putin puppet, and he's going to, that's why he's opposed to aid to Ukraine and so on and so forth. That other statements that he made, and also, frankly, his behavior when he was president, it gets forgotten. So he comes across as being, it's just being clearly, unequivocally, opposed to this funding. But he actually did make statements even a while ago that showed that he cannot be relied on. For example, after he went to visit Viktor Orban, what was it, a month or 2 months ago, and he said, "Not another penny for Ukraine." A few days later, he said, but we could give him loans." It's just like, well, which is just another way of saying we can give him the money.
Do you think the intelligence agency or somebody's got his ear to kind of convince him to turn some of these? Sometimes, like we said, that sometimes his gut instinct seems right, but then it just gets twisted and distorted in this American political machine and comes out, and we end up with the same damn thing we always end up with,
Right.
these endless wars and out of control government spending. So, do you think there's some government agencies that are, twisting his arm or bending his ear, getting him to, is it the
Well, let's say it.
CIA?
Yeah. Well, it's not impossible. I mean that.
I mean, I guess we're just in the realm of
Yeah. Right.
conjecture right
Right.
now, but
Right. Yeah. No. There's. Of course, we don't know if he met with anybody from the intelligence agency recently, but Speaker Mike Johnson clearly did, and it was after the meeting that he made a 180-degree turn.
and declared that he was a wartime speaker.
Yeah. Right.
So, wow, when
And
did we
so,
go to one more? When are we in war? Like,
right.
I mean,
But perhaps as I don't know who it was, but it pointed out maybe it was Larry Johnson that quite simply, or Ray McGovern, they quite simply actually may have told him the truth about something, and they say, look, Ukraine is the front's going to collapse, or we predict it will collapse, in the next few months or so before the election, and if it does, they'll blame it on you. And
right.
yeah, and that may have been like, okay, he didn't realize how bad it was. He was partly because there's all this good, happy talk, always coming from Ukraine. Everything the like the extent of their losses are always being suppressed. Probably, he's kind of getting fooled by his own media into thinking that there's nothing to worry about.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, but if they said, hey, okay, the truth is that it's actually going,
Right.
and that they're in danger of imminent collapse, and so you better spend this money.
And then it'll look bad on Biden instead, right? Because Biden's won, and the Democrats been pushing for this, and I think that's probably going to be the outcome. I mean, it looks like, from my understanding, whole battalions are surrendering now.
Right.
The front line is collapsing in Ukraine.
Yeah,
Right.
I wouldn't quite say that it's collapsing. There's, it was funny actually. I just saw a report.
Me down.
Yeah.
No.
Well, okay, you can't. Okay, you can say it's collapsing, but I want to point something out. I was struck by this just today because I saw a report that if you actually look at all the gains that are made in the months of March and April, these last 2 months, it only amounts to 0.5% of the territory of the Donetsk Oblast. Mm-hmm. And I stopped and thought about that. Well, okay, so we're actually about half of the Donetsk Oblast is already occupied by the Russians. So, if you look at the second half, if the Russians continue to seize territory at that rate, 0.5% of the total every 2 months, it'll take them 16 years to just get that.
That's not how it works.
Right. I know. I'm just starting that. But if you stop, in other words, if you just looked at the map, there have been changes, but the total amount of territory that the Ukrainians have lost in the last couple of months is not that much. The thing is that these are some very strategic, important parts. This is their most heavily fortified part of the defensive lines, and the Russians are breaking through on. The Avdiivka they already took, and that was probably the single, their greatest fortress city. Maybe many people have said perhaps the most highly densely fortified place on the earth. So that fell. But then also recently a place called Novomykhailivka, and then there's Krasnogorovka, which is that Novomykhailivka was also a fortress city that fell. Krasnogorovka is in the process of falling, probably will fall in the next few days. And then there's this town, Ocheren. It's up on the high ground. Again, it's small, but it's it's strategic. So, you can't just look at territory. These are, key points in the, kind of fortresses along the main defensive line, the one that the Ukrainians built up over the course of like 10 years. And the Russians are breaking through it. And then, of course, the other thing is that they just don't have the reserves. So, like when the Russians break through now, they got to, it used to be that they had somebody in reserve back there, fresh, bring them in, well trained, okay, plug the hole, okay, and then the Russians would have to attrit that new unit. It might take months before they move forward again. Right. And now they got to pull them from some other part of the line, and this unit, let's say, this brigade or whatever that they bring in is only at 50% strength. Everybody's exhausted. Morale is poor. They're under-equipped. And that's why we've had, these basically mutinies, these brigades that are refusing actually to be redeployed. and a certain number of mass surrenders. So all of these point to, okay, yeah, the amount of territory that the Russians have gained, is not very large. It's actually quite small, but it's in a very, strategically important area. And, we're seeing real obvious signs that the that the Ukrainians really are on their last legs. So that's
Right.
probably what the CIA again was telling Mike Johnson,
Right.
and maybe Mike Johnson passed that on to Trump, and Trump gave him his blessing. Let's go for this.
Mm. Right. Well, I mean, so the front line is beginning to collapse in parts, and really, this is the only line. So, like, once this is broken through, I don't think, like you said, there aren't reserves.
Right,
So, and this recent law that was passed by Zelensky, it won't allow any soldiers to have any leave time ever. They're supposed to go on rotation,
right,
where they can go back for a couple months and then go back to the front. And now you're permanently on the front, and now they're working with the European Union, certain countries like Poland and Lithuania or Estonia, I believe, or looking at trying to extradite the Ukrainian citizens to send them back to Ukraine to fight. Obviously, they don't want to fight.
right. They left Ukraine because they didn't want to fight.
Right. So now they're trying to force these people back to
Right,
the country to fight, and they're denying them passports at the Ukrainian embassy because they say, "Oh, you're fighting
right,
age. You have to go back to the front." So clearly, they don't have the men. The morale is at rock bottom, and like you said, there's just been straight up mutinies where battalions on the front just say, like, "No, this is it. We were promised to be back home for our 3 months. We've been here for a year, and you're now saying we have to stay here till we die."
right.
And you can see how morale is collapsing. And so we have mutinies, mass surrenders. Heard a whole battalion, which I don't know how many people are in a battalion.
A few hundred,
So
like
yeah,
500,
just
something
like
that.
whole battalions now are
500.
surrendering, negotiating surrenders with the Russian side. So I think maybe it's a bit too dramatic to say it's collapsing, but
It's on the verge of
it's on the
collapse.
verge of.
It
I'm not
certainly
going to
appears
say. I'm
that.
going to say the front line's collapsing.
Uh-huh.
I don't see this lasting much longer.
Right.
A couple
Yeah.
months, but because
I think you're probably right. I guess I'm being cautious because, again, I've heard talks about imminent collapse for a couple of years.
yeah, but
But I mean, but we've never seen this before. There's a qualitative change, and again, the Russians never broke through these fortress and seized these fortress towns before, and they're doing it.
and there's
Right,
there's a pure man problem
right.
left. Heard 8,000 Ukrainians were killed last week alone. So we're
Mhm.
getting over 1,000 dead Ukrainians a
Right.
day that are just
Well,
being
I think actually it's 1,000 killed or
or
severely wounded.
wounded.
It's wounded so that they're not going to be back in action for a long,
Okay,
long time, if ever.
right, but those are not sustainable, and they're
Right,
not inflicting losses or very few losses on the Russians because the Russians are able to just
right,
fly their glide bombs in and blow up their
right. Yeah, that's
fortifications.
good. They have that air superiority makes all the difference, and then and a huge artillery advantage. Um, yeah, there's we do we really don't know. We have these estimates from the Ministry of Defense on Ukrainian losses, which I think are probably accurate. But even that, they just their estimates because
Talking about the Russian Ministry of
yeah, the
Defense.
Russian Ministry of Defense. So like that 8,000 figure came from the Russian Ministry of Defense, and again, they're probably accurate, but they're just estimates. We have something much more solid actually about Russian losses. There's this group called Media Zona, which is an anti-Putin organization, hostile to the government, hostile to the war effort, and they work in collaboration with the BBC. And they've been actually keeping track of Russian fatalities.
So
Actually killed.
they have every incentive to inflate
Right,
these numbers.
right. But it's it appears they're doing an honest job. They go and they document they go to actually, they look at
Obituaries.
obituaries and local media all around the country, even cemetery records from cemeteries and so on and so forth. And from that, they come up with a total of like 55,000, which is significant. Like the U.S. lost about that many people in the Vietnam War over a longer period of time. So it's significant. But the what's clear is that actually, like the number of fatalities has been dropping steadily. It peaked. There were two peaks, and right at the very beginning of the war, when the Russians first moved in. and then during the Battle of Bakhmut.
Mm.
Since then, it's declined. There was a minor peak at the beginning of the Avdiivka siege, but just a minor peak. And then since then, it's really now at its lowest level that it's ever been at. So they are making these advances.
Well,
You know,
while Ukraine's
while
going up, right?
yeah,
The
yeah,
fidelity.
clearly, yeah, and I mean we have these statistics from the Russian Ministry of Defense, but then also we just get a lot of reports from the front line,
Mm.
and you know yeah, you wonder, well, why are these brigades, refusing to go in? Because they see what's happening. They say, it's suicidal. We're not doing it. Um, so yeah, while they're going up on the Ukrainian side, the losses are going down on the Russian side.
Mm. Okay, well, just bring it back a bit. So I think you might be right. So my speaker Mike Johnson might have been aware that it's over in Ukraine, and so I'm going to
Yeah,
pass this bill so they don't blame it on me, saying it's
right,
because we didn't give them money. We'll give them the
right. Well,
money.
that's something I always wondered. It's like, because clearly that's what Biden was intending to do. It seemed like it was just obvious.
Right.
But I
So do you
think
think
probably on
Biden's upset that it went through? Because he's like, oh damn it, now I don't have my scapegoat.
yeah, well,
He's got to know
yeah,
that it's
yeah,
over, right? He's got to
right.
know. I mean,
Well, no, he does. I think you probably make a mistake. I'm sure he's, maybe some things, some troubling reports, but he probably doesn't hear them. He doesn't believe. Again, if anybody is kind of lost in this illusion of American grandeur, of American invisibility, Biden is. I don't think I mean, seriously, I think his head's in
yeah,
a cloud, and he probably really believes that. And everybody around him knows that that's what he thinks, and that's what they say, whatever you do, you want to keep your job. Don't tell the
yeah.
boss the truth. It's like Zelensky, as they're saying in Ukraine, like his advisors say he's delusional. I mean, and I think it equally applies to Biden and a lot of the people around him.
Right. I don't know if you saw this news story, but I think it's very fitting that the Biden administration has hired Steven Spielberg to
Right,
help direct Biden's reelection campaign because
right,
it's doing so well. And I felt like that's perfect because
right.
this is how our politicians operate, how Biden and Zelensky
Yeah,
operate.
right,
It's like a movie.
right,
They just can direct it, and they live in this fantasy world where
right.
they can just conjure up the narrative
Yeah,
and write their own story. But I think they're slowly realizing, or maybe they're not, maybe they're just constantly in denial
yeah,
that, hey, the story's not going the way that I'm trying to write it.
right.
Somebody's messing up my
Yeah,
story.
but it seems like their reaction, like is always to double down. It's just they really are incapable of an honest reassessment.
Mm. Yeah,
It's
and
just
yeah, right. I mean, and that's
it,
it's what it all comes down to. We talked about it before. It's just the media. It's all propaganda now. What we do is movie theater stuff. We try to control the narrative, and to we try to control the narrative not only in our own country but in all these other countries. We funnel a bunch of money into different media organizations around the world, like you're saying in Taiwan. I mean, in Western Europe, we have control, but I think a lot of countries are starting to realize it. Like, hey, the United States is not really our friend. They're coming in and they're throwing in money to try to foment some color revolution or
right. This
uh,
is happening in Georgia right now.
right. So yeah, we had that in Georgia, and I mean, Ukraine was the same thing. That's what we
Right.
did. We pumped in billions of dollars to create this story, this media narrative in Ukraine to say that Russia's bad and we got aligned with the
Yeah.
EU and NATO
Right.
and
Of
the
course, we
United
were
States.
building off. There was this native hostility, among
Mhm.
the
Right, but they
Banderites.
say that's what we do. We go
But
and we find it. You
right,
go to any country,
right.
like, and you can see,
It was a fairly small minority in Ukraine
right,
that really had that ideological obsession.
and that we do it again every year. If you're paying attention to the news, you can see it happen all the time. Like, for example, like Juan Guaido in South America. I don't know if you remember him. We
Yeah.
just declared this guy as president, and we'll back him.
Right.
And wouldn't it be so weird if we're
Right.
living in the United States and Putin, Xi Jinping just say, "Hey guys, guess what? We're making I don't know, some celebrity. We're making P Diddy president. We just decided,
Right.
when we called it."
Or for that matter, it's just like if uh, Wang Yi, the foreign minister in China, came to the U.S. and told him, "We're going to punish you if you continue to support Ukraine. Just how would we take it? Of course,
Yeah.
there's just everybody
And
was up in arms. I
and,
mean, it
and
would
we're,
be,
we're giving actual real military support.
yeah, of course,
we're,
right,
we're sending
exactly. I
real
mean,
weapons and
right,
munitions, and China is selling chips and metal raw
yeah,
materials, doing
right,
normal trade between
right.
countries.
Again, there's
Yeah.
just no self awareness. Like when you see Biden, Blinken going off to China and making these statements, you're just thinking, look, I mean, most of us would be really embarrassed. Okay, the president told me to do this, but God, I can't just can't do this. This is just too embarrassing. But
Right.
I don't think he has any self awareness. Clearly he seems to. He just, again, he's just, like Biden himself. He just thinks we're the exceptional nation. Not only are we all powerful, but that we're like the fount of morality. And it's like people oppose us. They're not people that have a different perspective, or it's a different civilization with different values or whatever. But
Mm,
they're just the enemies of good, and we represent good. All our opponents are evil, like Putin and now Xi Jinping.
right.
I think that's really the way they think.
Yeah, but what's interesting now is that we have so many nations and peoples actively defying the United States, and which is
Yeah,
like that. Like we're going, and you think we would begin to learn that we can't just will things into existence like we used to, and that when people are saying no to us, and we should listen to them because other countries have valid concerns as well, and then they want, it's not like these countries necessarily are wanting to be hostile to the United States. They're just trying to protect their own self-interest, and
right.
we won't do that. We won't consider it. Um,
Yeah.
so
Well, there is, I think, growing awareness, like just on the edges, among, I think there was a paper that came that maybe hasn't been published yet, but from the Rand Corporation that actually showed a rather shocking admission of reality, of the realities that we're discussing here. And you see, reports that are coming about Ukraine, and also, what was it? Well, here's somebody, not just on the edges, but um, the commander of the U.S. commander of European forces. I think that's more or less his title.
I don't
It's
know.
an Italian name, like Corvalli or something like that. But he very recently said that, look, actually the Russians have demonstrated a very impressive ability to learn, to adapt,
Mm,
and they're learning quickly, and and reforming their military, and like the army that they have now is just completely different and much more effective than the army that they started with. I mean,
mm,
this was a real. This was unlike the typical, Russians with shovels and kind of narrative that you're getting from the rest of the media. The
right.
Russians are just a bunch of barbarians, and
Human wave
yeah,
tactics.
right,
Mm.
exactly, and they know, yes, I know these guys are smart. They're figuring everything out very quickly, and yeah,
We're
they
the
haven't,
ones that are
yeah, that are
figuring
not
anything
learning
out.
anything. We're not
Yeah,
adapting.
we
Yeah,
talked about this
right.
before, and it still always blows my
So
mind that we put in all this money in our
yeah,
military and we don't adapt. We
right,
don't adapt to what Russia's doing. We don't adapt to what
right,
Iran is doing. We just throw more good money after bad. We got to like, no, we have to preserve the integrity of the Patriot system and make sure
right.
that we get our sales up without any admission that,
Yeah,
hey, maybe this product isn't that great anymore and we need to come up with a better product or to
right.
reform it in some way.
Yeah,
But there's no self-reflection
right.
with
So
Americans.
there are a few, voices of realism. The commander that I mentioned, the Rand Corporation report, the occasional article in the New York Times or whatever that leaks through. There obviously are people that
Mm.
are within the government or associated with the U.S. government that are starting to see what's going on, but the blob, as they say, the deep state, the administration shows no signs of waking up to it. So it's going to, maybe eventually this realism will penetrate to the core, but I'm just not going to hold my breath. Just these people at the top. Again, yeah, I guess one thing is like when in a situation like this, you don't want to be the bearer of the bad tidings. It just seems like it's always people want to hear that the U.S. is number one. they've heard it for the longest time, and
I don't
you
even
know,
know if that's so true if they even want to hear it because I feel like so many people in America and the Western world they know something's wrong and
yeah. Yeah, I admit, I think you're right.
and I think
Well,
that
among the general populace, at
right
least.
and when people that's why I think that a show like this is gaining more popularity is that people want to hear kind of make sense of what is going wrong and they have to explain to them like things aren't right and yeah this makes sense and because you don't want to live with like an ostrich with your head stuck in the sand.
Right.
You
Well,
know?
I think some people do, but yeah,
Okay,
unfortunately, yeah, there are some of you who are very comfortable with it. And
well, as
actually,
long as
again,
they're
it's
getting
like,
paid, then
yeah, they get paid, and their careers depend on it.
yeah.
It's just like
I mean, I'm talking
you're
about
like,
the average
right,
American, though. I
exactly,
think
yeah,
you
yeah.
see. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, we're already over an hour, so I want to end though with just one question. Um, is it called the Sword of Damocles? Is that the
Yeah.
idea? Is the Sword of Damocles the idea that like you have
It's,
this dangling that? Well, explain that real quick because I want to use that. I was going to use it. I'm like, not sure, but
yeah, well, the sword of Damocles, I mean, it's just hanging by a thread, over, let's say, over one's head. So it's
okay.
just,
That's what I was saying. So I feel like we have three swords of Damocles. We have I feel like we have the economic sanction war potentially in with China, which could escalate very quickly. Maybe not militarily, possibly even militarily, but economically would I think have more devastating consequences for Americans living here than a military conflict potentially.
right,
So there's that one, and then we have the collapse of the Ukraine government is the next one, and then the third Damocles sword is the powder keg in the Middle East. Which one do you think will happen first? Because we have all these three of these things are moving forward. I think all
right,
three are going to happen.
right. I guess,
Well,
I would still say that the most explosive situation and the least likely to be resolved in a less than catastrophic way. I mean, there's a potential for catastrophe in all three, but the one that's, I think, most likely to end in catastrophe, I actually don't see any way that it won't end in catastrophe, is the war in Palestine and Israel. Because
I agree. That's the big one.
Right,
That's the real.
right. Again, we
Well,
have
China's pretty big too.
yeah. Well, I mean, of course, the other ones have a potential because we're talking about nuclear superpowers,
right.
in both cases, and then of course, an economic superpower in the case of China. Um, but it's just that it seems to me that Netanyahu just really doesn't have a way out. And okay, I think he tried to get the U.S. involved to get in a war with Iran. Okay, the U.S. was able to avert it this time, but it was close. And again, probably part of the deal is okay. Well, all right. Well, I'll let you have. Okay, we won't escalate, but we're going into Rafah, and I don't care what you say. And the U.S. said fine. That's not just my speculation, but there were reports that appeared in the.
Yeah, you called that before it happened.
Yeah. So anyway, it looks like that's about to begin, and it's going to be a disaster, and it's not going to solve anything. It's going to make Israel's position, all the worse. Israel's really suffered huge blows to their standing in the world as a result of this, and economic blows too. So it's only going to make things worse for them. And so that incentive that Netanyahu has to escalate his way out of it remains. And so I think we still have this potential, a very high potential for a war with Hezbollah, okay, or with Iran. It's still there, and I think it can very, very easily happen.
Right.
It almost seems likely to me.
We can analyze this in deeper detail later, but I just feel like even if we wanted to go to war with Iran, I just feel like it wouldn't last very long because we just couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, clearly we don't want to. I mean, it's just like I think it's actually probably been in the Pentagon that's pulled the plugs. There are people in our government that have been hankering after a war with Iran, for decades, just like in Israel, and some of them are dual citizens. But but there are enough people, like in the Pentagon, I think, who've said say, look, this isn't going to work. This is going to be a real mess. And that's so like whenever, it happened with George W. Bush and, again, recently when we came to close to having a war with Iran, where there was an opportunity to escalate, we've always found a way to de-escalate. But it's always been a close call because there are these powerful forces, the Israeli government itself, and then factions within our own government that are just primed, are just eager to do it, and they just may. At some point, Israel just may go for broke when they just find, that Gaza has been a total failure. That Netanyahu is just going to say, I don't care what the U.S. says. They're telling me they're not going to back me up, but I know they're wrong. They will, and he's probably right in that calculation. Because
it's gross.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I feel like the Ukraine war is coming towards the final chapters.
Right. We're entering a very dangerous phase because, of course, I think probably we can talk about this more another time. But
when it collapses, things get scary.
Right.
So that's why I kind of feel like the collapse might be coming soon. I think we had that bet that I said by June 1st. I think what I was saying, June 1st is when the current regime in Ukraine will turn on its handlers, turn on the United States. I'm still got 1 month. We'll see.
I think it won't happen.
I'm always too eager. I lost the bet. Well, we got 1 more day. I'll pay
Right.
$10 tomorrow because we did not see a war break out between Iran and Israel. Although it came pretty damn close. For a second there, I was like,
I always thought I was going to lose my $10. I lost a little bit of sleep over that.
Yeah, it's strange. And I was like, yes, I might get 10. I was like, wait a second, this is terrible. This is awful. Okay, all right, well, we'll stop there. Thanks a lot, Dad.